I've been playing a lot of Riftbound lately, and I realized that it includes one of my favorite mechanics of all time from a design perspective. But that same mechanic also happens to be one of the main sources of confusion for new players learning the game. And I think that's for good reason. I'm Simon from Games Deconstructed, that mechanic is hidden, and I'm here to tell you exactly why I find it so interesting. Now, my mom always told me to get the bad stuff out of the way first, so let's start with why I find the mechanic to be somewhat badly explained, and this section is going to double as an explainer of what it actually does, in case you're not 100% familiar. The reminder text for cards with hidden, which is very likely going to be your first point of contact with the mechanic, reads, "Hide me for rune, to react with later for 0. That seems simple enough. You can play the card face down and activate it later as a surprise for your opponent, something a bit akin to Yu-Gi-Oh's trap cards or Hearthstone's secrets. What the reminder text doesn't tell you is that nearly every single word in that sentence includes some sort of caveat or limitation, and it's those rules peculiarities that those caveats bring with them that make the mechanic as interesting as it is in actual gameplay. So, first caveat is location. You can only hide cards on battlefields you control, so there is a prerequisite of having conquered and currently being in control of a battlefield. And the card is going to remain hidden only for as long as you are in control of that battlefield, so you cannot move your units back and leave a trap lying in wait for your opponent to move in. Staying on the topic of location, if the hidden card has an effect that targets, or creates a token, or plays a unit, those choices have to apply to the battlefield where it was hidden. So it can only target targets on that battlefield or play a unit or token onto that same battlefield. You may also not hide more than one card per battlefield, barring something like the bundle tree allowing you to do so. Then there's timing considerations. Hide now doesn't really indicate at what speed that action is going to be happening, and cards with hidden can otherwise be played from hand at a variety of speeds. Slow speed, action speed, etc. So the thing you need to remember is that hiding a card happens on your own turn, at slow speed, irrespective of what speed the card would actually have if played from hand. Finally, my gripes with the "to react with later" part. Later here has a very specific meaning. It stands for after the end of the current turn. So you can't hide a card and then immediately reveal it, even though that would arguably also constitute later, just less so. But you will have to wait until the start of your opponent's turn, or perhaps even your own next turn, to activate a card that you've hidden. So if we wouldn't go off the reminder text, but what the core rules actually indicate hidden stands for, it would sound something like this. It is functionally short for, while this card is in your hand or in the champion zone on your turn during an open state, you may pay a rune to hide this face down at a battlefield you control that doesn't already have a face down card hidden there for as long as you control that battlefield. Beginning on the next turn, this gains reaction, and you may play this ignoring its base cost. And then there's also the bits about targeting and having to play units to the battlefield where it was hidden. That's part of a separate rule. So, yep. Obviously, this would be a no-go at this length if we wanted to actually print this on cards, and I'm not going to rag on, reminder text not including every single rules interaction and edge case, but, I think we can agree that the current one is pretty far off the mark when compared to what the mechanic actually does. And this, I feel, is what leads to that new player confusion, to people attempting to play hidden cards in their base or play multiple ones to a single battlefield. And yes, this is very much solved by people just reading the core rules, but it is a lot of rules overhead for a mechanic that's part of the core set, and also quite widespread in that core set, because Teemo's a deck in there and his main mechanic is playing a lot of hidden cards. But now let's move on to the good stuff. And 90% of that good stuff is going to be sort of a reflection, a happier counterpart to the limitations we've already discussed. Because Putting the hidden keyword on a card effectively makes it modular, meaning that you have two different ways of playing it, and it could even be argued that they accomplish two different purposes depending on which one you choose. And each of those limitations of hiding that I've talked about is going to form an axis along which you will have to make the decision of if you prefer to play it hidden versus normally. Let's take a simple effect like fight or flight. FOF returns a unit from a battlefield to its controller's base. It can be used as a combat trick to prevent your opponent's creatures from making it to battle, or it can be used to save one of your own units from getting ganked at a battlefield they are currently in control of. Here's the categories that are going to change about the card depending on if you play it hidden or not. Cost, targeting, information/telegraphing, speed, and timing. Cost is an easy one. FOF costs 2 energy, no runes to play from hand. Hiding it costs 0 energy, but has you recycle a rune, putting you back a resource in the long run. So you can tap out for other cards and hide that fight or flight for tempo, or you can decide to play it from hand to preserve that sort of long-term value of not having to recycle one of your resources. Targeting is also something that we've already gone over. The from a battlefield part is going to apply to the battlefield where you've chosen to hide fight or flight, and if you play it from hand, it can apply to either. On especially swingy turns, maybe ones where your opponent's moving a lot of cards around and attempting a double conquer or something, that targeting restriction might matter in a big way. In multiplayer formats, with there being 3 battlefields instead of 2, that distinction is even more stark. Now, on the information front, if you choose to hide a card at a battlefield, you are giving your opponent a lot of additional information as to what sort of interaction they might need to play around. Because if you just have 2 open energy and a card in hand, that might mean a variety of things. It might be the fight or flight, but it might just as well be a ride the wind or a gust, which each of those is going to lead the turn down a very, very different direction. So that decision to put a card down is very much like telling your opponent, hey, I intend to play a card from a very limited pool of cards, and it's going to apply to something on this battlefield specifically. And awareness of that limited pool and what's in it is very much going to be a skill test for players, because if you play any given matchup enough, you should be able to tell what hidden cards your opponent is playing. Maybe unless it's a Teemo deck, because those play a lot of different ones. But that of course opens up possibilities of outmaneuvering your opponent by playing something a bit more off the wall. In my recent Runes and Rift appearance, the casters remarked on my decision to include Teemos in my Annie deck apart from the usual fight or flights.
Annie decks, so not that we've seen it this series, so we're not 100% sure, but run cards like Fight or Flight that can be hidden. So normally you would just assume, but because in game 1 we saw the Teemo, that does add an extra layer to the question that Ari has to answer on when.
This decision creates an interesting 50-50 for the opponent, because a card I hide on a battlefield might mean that one of your units is getting bounced back to base, but it might just as well represent 4 additional might on that battlefield. And it was up to my opponents to figure out which was which unfortunately they were quite effective at. Speed is also going to be a big one here. There's 3 different speeds in Riftbound. Slow speed you can only play on your turn if nothing else is happening, kind of like sorceries in Magic. Action speed means that you can play it in showdowns, in combat on either player's turn, but only if nothing else is on the chain, the local equivalent of the stack. Whereas reactions can be played whenever anything is placed on the chain, and they are going to resolve before that chain item, kind of like instants in MTG. What that means practically is that if your opponent attempts to kill a creature of yours with, say, Void Seeker, an action speed removal spell, an action speed combat trick is not going to save your creature, because the Seeker is going to resolve before you can even play it. But a reaction speed one can be played in response to that piece of removal and is going to be able to save your unit. And since hidden cards can be played as reactions after that sort of maturation period, Fight or Flight is kind of going to be both examples here. Played from hand, it's going to look on sadly as your Kai'Sa falls to 4 damage. But if played from hidden, at reaction speed, it's going to escort her to safety, give her a little kiss on the forehead, and laugh as your opponent's spell mistargets and hits nothing. Finally, there's timing. If you're hoping to move a unit on your own turn as part of some sort of larger sequence or game-winning play, it's not going to be possible to do so from hiding due to that aforementioned maturation period. You're gonna have to wait until your opponent's turn or perhaps your own next turn. So to sum up, the addition of that single keyword is going to make the card not only modular, but modular in an interesting way. Since there's multiple axes of strength and weakness when it comes to playing those hidden cards, they are going to be contextually important or unimportant in different matchups, board states, and games. And that's what's interesting here. It's rarely going to be a brainlessly clear-cut decision of which one is preferred, if both are mechanically possible, of course. And I'd like to give you an even better example of how different those two modes can be on a single card. Because Fight or Flight was a simple one, but this one really shows what can be done with the mechanic. But first, if you're enjoying the video, I would really appreciate if you clicked that subscribe button, and I'll have some more Riftbound videos coming your way shortly. Thank you. This is Hostile Takeover, a preview from the Spiritforged set that serves as the signature spell for the champion Renata. It's a 5 energy, 2 runes, slow speed spell that allows you to take control of an enemy unit for 1 turn and 1 turn only. If it's still alive as the turn ends, you unfortunately have to give it back. When played from hand, it's a relatively costly card with a huge power ceiling. This card can be a potential game ender. It can be part of your game-winning plan on your final turn. Maybe you take over one of 2 defenders on a battlefield, having them trade against each other and leaving it open for your conquer afterwards. Or perhaps you just take over the stronger one of the 2 and conquer with your opponent's own prized unit. Or perhaps you take over a unit with ganking, conquer that battlefield with that unit, and then move it to the other battlefield, conquering both with your opponent's single taken over unit. Those are of course very optimistic scenarios, but that's kind of the power level of the card that you can expect. So it might raise an eyebrow or two when you realize that you can forego paying that cost and just hide it for recycling a single rune. But when hidden, the card is going to serve a vastly different purpose. And it's going to be one with a significantly lower power ceiling. It's not that it's going to be objectively worse to play it that way, it's just that the reward is going to be more appropriate for the cost that you pay for the card. Because if we look at the axes that we've already discussed, several of them are going to impact the situation here pretty starkly. Using the card as part of your game-winning final turn requires some immediacy, something you will not get if you have to wait until end of turn for the hidden card to mature. Equally important is that if you play it on a battlefield you control and it's only able to impact targets on that specific battlefield, you're not gonna be able to use it to attack with your opponent's creatures. It's only gonna pop if your opponent chooses to attack into it, and you're able to activate it to take over one of their creatures in proper combat trick fashion. Now this may very well be able to stop your opponent's attacks, and in some cases stop them excellently, but it's not that much different from what Fight or Flight or, say, Phase Breaker would be able to accomplish. It has slightly higher potential than these two, since if your opponent is attacking with 2 creatures, it's very likely that if you take over one of them, at least one of those attackers is going to perish, but you know, that's perfectly okay for a signature card. They are intended to be a bit more powerful than your kind of run-of-the-mill combat trick. And that too, of course, can be circumvented if your opponent sequences their attacks in a better way, just attacking one after the other perhaps, but that is going to be very dependent on the board state, on what sort of mites we are talking about, so yeah, we'll have to see how powerful this mode actually is. So just the addition of that one keyword, and to be honest, the large amounts of rules baggage that that single keyword brings with it, can turn a card from an expensive but potential game ender to a slightly premium combat trick. If that isn't fun design, I don't know what is. If you play Riftbound yourself, let me know in the comments what your favorite mechanic in the game is. Is it movement? Is it point scoring? Is it also hidden? Is it something else? A huge thank you go to the Patreon supporters over on patreon.com/gamesdeconstructed. If you'd like for your name to appear in the credits alongside such luminaries as Anna Schulz, ASAS, and Good Luck, the Patreon is by far the best way to support the channel. I've been Simon from Games Deconstructed, thanks for watching, and I hope to see you in the next one.